Know Thyself is dedicated to the exploration of the most rewarding task an individual can ever embark on, the journey to find oneself. Our intention is to investigate the universal principles that have equipped our species to seek the treasure of all treasures, self-knowledge. With your host, Daniel Powinski and Eduardo Manteca, this is the Know Thyself podcast. All right, welcome to the Know Thyself podcast. I'm here with Daniel.
Hello.
I'm Eduardo. And today, as we're coming into the end of the year, we have a very special episode, an episode we've been wanting to do for some time now, and now it seems to be just perfect for the timing's sake. We have had this talk since probably, I'd say more than a decade ago, and that is just the origins of a movie that is now being resurrected, and how fitting for the name of the movie, Matrix Resurrections.
I like what you did there.
Oh, you saw what I did
that was
there.
Nice.
And so today we're going to do a really, we're going to do our best to stay on track about, everything that this story and these allegories entail. There's just so much to unfold. There's so much to open up. And so what we'll do is we'll start from the first, we'll move on to the second and go on to the third, and then just sort of, do a breakdown. And for those who may want to know where I'm coming from, I used a lecture from Mark Passio, which I definitely recommend you going to look for. You can find it on the tube. You can find it on his site. But there's also obviously a lot of resources on this. I think since the movie came out in '99, people have tried to do their own way of sort of breaking it down and comparing it to Greek mythology and other origins that are brought up into the movie. But I've been really anticipating this day, just because we used to talk about this even like in my garage back when I lived at home. Right out of high school, I remember kind of just sort of saying, hey, this is what I think this means, and how come we're not seeing things the way others, or are others seeing things the way we're seeing them right now? And we'd have these comparisons. So it's been like a long time coming. So here we are now.
Right.
And so it's sort of difficult to contain my excitement for it, because I got pages and pages, and Daniel has beautiful notes written out right now. So without further ado, man, let's get started. So, like I said, we'll start with the first of the three movies, and many of you are familiar with the first movie. If you're not, it'll help to go back and watch this. But, as I already said, there's the allegory, right? The way that these three stories are put together, and how I've understood it to be is, really breaking down the why, the how, and the what in these three movies. How Passio puts it in his lecture is neatly, it's sort of like packaged in a way that is easy to digest, like where it's all coming from. And I thought some of the other lectures I would look into, we're going to talk about, where the book came from, where the directors may have been taking a lot of their influence from. And for those who don't know, I remember learning about this again years ago, but from Jean Baudrillard, you can find this book, which was written, I think, in the 60s, in the 80s, about this postmodern world, and then the allegories that are put in there as regards to, humanity and the idea of being asleep, right? So in every three of these movies, Neo and the main character always wakes from being asleep. So I think we should start there before I just get into the nitty gritty of every little scene. And I don't think we'll do such an intricate breakdown, but to be asleep and to then be awakened with the purpose, and what the purpose leads Neo and the main character, in this case, I think his name is Mr. Anderson, and how it leads him to go down that rabbit hole. So do you want to start there?
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And I think that's a great way to look at it, because
long introduction, but
No, man, I love it. And I think, moving forward, let's kind of break it down, that this conversation is really going to be looking at these larger esoteric themes that we've already approached throughout the podcast.
For sure.
So we're going to see the aspect of the sacred feminine. we're going to see, which is going to be played very much through the character of Trinity.
Right.
What that represents. And again, what we're going to be wanting to look at is all of these characters represent the components of our own consciousness.
Correct.
So again, anytime we approach these allegorical stories of the Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland, which are both mentioned in these movies,
They
right?
are.
Both references are, and that's to tie together the spiritual unfoldment story that's kind of presented in front of us. Anytime we're looking at any of these kind of stories, these larger allegories, these bigger than life stories, we're looking at components within our own consciousness. And that's going to be the biggest thing moving forward. We can visualize this as an external storytelling on the screen, but it's just the interplaying of ourselves being in the physical, right? It's for our eyes. It's this play that's kind of happening. And so big aspects, we're going to see the aspect of the sacred feminine. We're going to see the aspect of the divine will, finding the will. The aspect of the purification of thoughts. We're going to see the damaging aspects of limiting belief systems and what happens when we put all of our faith in a belief system.
Right.
And we're going to watch this evolution kind of go through all these characters. And, the main thing we're going to kind of focus in is the control and the power that comes in control. And we're going to look at this from an external lens of how that's pushed onto us. But more importantly, we're going to look how this can be generated within the self. And we're going to really kind of learn a deep occult axiom. And that is the aspect that you can have power, but you don't have control.
Right.
But if you have control, you now have power. And that's what we're going to kind of get into. And there's so many other themes that are going to kind of come up. And even what this matrix represents.
Right.
And that's, you said a great thing, and Passio broke this down beautifully. First matrix is very much as, what is the matrix, right? Second matrix, how did we get into the matrix? And the third matrix is, how do we get out of the matrix, right? And so, and even, he spoke about that in his presentation of how, isn't it funny how the two following films weren't as popular? And it's because people don't mind seeing what the matrix is. They kind of know this. It's kind of intuitive. When it gets part in front of their eyes, they're like, oh yeah, it's a little bit more apparent there. But that's a lot easier. But when you have to start getting down deep of how did we get into the matrix, and we start seeing how maybe our own strings might be powering some of this, it gets a little bit more personal and it gets a little bit more uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's what makes it difficult to really take that path, the path of being responsible to giving power to authority rather than power to truth.
Exactly, which is the ultimate authority.
Right.
And that's going to be this whole aspect of, we're going to learn all the Hermetic principles are going to come up here.
Yeah.
The law of generation, polarities, okay? The aspect of the electromagnetic energy that we spoke so much about last episode. How is our energy being used? Who are you giving your energy to? Even this aspect in this discussion of, in this 5 sense reality, we have to be honest with ourselves. You're either dominating or you're surrendering at all moments. Okay. And there is a realm that needs to be dominated, and that's the will. The will needs to be dominated. It needs to be honed and kind of carved out of marble, right? But then there's this aspect of there is something that we need to surrender to. Well, what are you surrendering to? Are you surrendering to this man-made matrix that's just kind of pushing glamour and facade and kind of that woman in the red dress? Or are you surrendering to natural law, 100%. Truth, the highest principle of the universe? And so, yeah, man, I'm excited to kind of cover all of these themes, even what that red pill and the blue pill means. But I love where you brought it up, because what's unique about seeing a trilogy is the longer telling story of the spiritual development. And even how unique it is, we have successes within the spiritual development, but that doesn't mean the journey's over. There's conclusion and there's good enthusiasm after the first movie, but there's still all these more difficult trials and tribulations still to come, which is very telling of our own spiritual development, and how you have this initial first burst and there's all this enthusiasm, but you learn very quickly that enthusiasm will kind of start to fade if there's not a generating force to keep that energy going. And that's really what the spiritual development is. It's finding out how to fan that fire. How do we bathe in the waters of the mystics rather than kind of just splash around or maybe even drown when we do certain kind of like, psychoactive experiences. And so that first theme you brought up, I think is probably one of the most important themes. And that is true. Our first character, Neo, or Mr. Anderson at this moment, is sleeping. But there's something that's also happening at that same moment. And so we have the main character, which is going to represent the will, right? The divine will. But there's something else that's always happening at that same time when that main character is asleep. Did you pick up on that part? Because I thought that was fascinating. There's like two events happening at once. While the main character is asleep as Neo, did you catch the parallel of what's happening in that scene right next to it afterwards?
Do you mean with technology knocking on him, or?
So, the aspect that in all the movies, Neo's sleeping in the beginning, but Trinity, the sacred feminine, is in distress.
I didn't want to jump too much ahead. Yeah.
Is that okay? I'm sorry, and I was fishing for it.
No, that's good. And I think that's what's going to make this discussion a lot of fun. I mean, we both know where we're going with this, so just by all means, go for it, man. Nothing is a spoiler here, but yes, I think that's the main thing we should talk about. I mean, if you go back to some of the episodes, and a lot of this stuff will resonate to the episodes we've done before. We talk about the trivium, right? So here we can actually have, how we're going to make that triangle apparent on how all three will come together. But yes, how the first line that connects to the second line will go if we're making a triangle. If you can picture that in your mind's eye, you have Neo then connecting right to the Trinity, to the heart, right? To the heart in distress.
Right.
Calling to him. Or in all three movies, there's always that reason to take action, right?
Yeah. Well, it's letting you know that the divine will within humanity is asleep. And the sacred feminine is in distress, and the protector of the sacred feminine, which is, again, the sacred feminine is within all of us. The protection of your sacred feminine within your own vessel, within your own chariot, is your divine will. The divine will is what protects the sacred feminine so it can blossom, your destiny.
Right.
That's so you can actually ground with this flow of God, right? And so this divine will is needed for that protection. And it's not because the sacred feminine is weak. It's because the sacred and feminine is important. It doesn't protect it because it's weak. It's not that it's weak. It's because it's important. We see that Trinity throughout the movie can protect herself. She's one of the most capable characters, actually, of protecting herself. It's not that she's weak. It's because she's important. And that's something we need to think about when we see any time a knight is protecting the princess in any kind of esoteric story. It's not protecting her because they're weak. It's protecting her because it's important. It's the connection to... It's the truth. You know what I mean?
Children first. We always said that before.
Women and children first, because there's purity there.
And
you know what I mean?
It. You
can feel it.
Us as this gender role, I shouldn't say that in anybody else, but for me, it's like it's a no-brainer. You feel it, the calling of like, okay, this is, I can step down because of the higher cause here.
There's a nourishing aspect there. Right. There's a creative aspect. There's the aspect of the universe is very well seen and kind of felt, and we know that. Like that's something that's kind of new. And so what we're seeing here is the female in our modern day society, the sacred feminine, has been very much restricted by the state and almost the planet Saturn and Mattern. Okay, and so what happens here is the female vessel, the female vessel becomes so cold and calcified in this experience. It comes so cold and calcified, and society around this female experience gets so cold and calcified that it no longer recognizes its mother. And actually, the system is trying to destroy its own mother. Yeah. We're going to kind of see that, but that's exactly what these kind of agents of the state that are going to be kind of going after Trinity at first. And this is kind of the death of intuition. This is the death of creativity.
Right.
This is the death of holistic thought. All of those amazing aspects that are really generated and housed in the right side of the brain, which is again what we're kind of working with between these two characters, is that divine will and that degeneration of care in the heart and that aspect of the sacred feminine. And so, It's really going to be an interesting aspect, because the heart is the unofficial spokesperson of this whole movie. Right? Like symbolically, when you start looking at it, the heart plays the biggest scenes. They're fighting, they're being able to dodge bullets everywhere. If you ever look at the transformational scenes, it's going to deal with the heart. And, again, they did a great job in that little breakdown. But even where this story starts, the hotel room that we find Trinity in it's in the hotel room, which is the heart of the city, right? And that's what the hotel is called. And this is actually where the first story ends as well, in the heart of the city. And it's very interesting because she's in room 303, right? And so
33 degrees, right?
Exactly. And so what we're saying there is when we're doing numerology, if there's a 0, we kind of drop that out. So the 33 degrees of Freemasonry,
right? Which represents the melting of the icing of that heart.
Perfect. Absolutely. It's those first stages of kind of illumination masonry, right? And so, just so interesting that it starts there, right?
Yeah.
And so again, cycles and patterns. The heart cycle, the heart pattern, everything is kind of connected. And what's unique too about this Trinity character, and because we kind of meet her first, right? Which is the emotions in this story, because the first time we meet Neo, or Mr. Anderson at this moment, he's sleeping, right? So we're not really getting much response from him. But something that's unique about this story, which is really this beautiful modern story, and it really helped push in, I think, the age of Aquarius, is because this feminine energy we're seeing here is more of this, of course, like the Sophia feminine energy that we're going to talk about in Gnosticism, but she's also going to have very much of this Luciferian approach as well. So we're going to see a very strong, independent feminine image, which is a little bit counter to what we saw in the age of Pisces.
Right.
Because of duality, they would always kind of have to make the masculine and the feminine dual partners and like dual aspects of each other, because it was kind of part of the age. We had to kind of separate everything in that age into camps of, this is what this means and this is what that means, right? Well, we're evolving out of that age. And so this is more of an age of Aquarius telling of this coming of consciousness, and the feminine energy, which is Trinity, is going to be given a more proper expression of that energy that comes within. Really similar, I would say, to the number 7 in the movie 9. Did you see that kind of did you see that resemblance?
Absolutely.
Just like badass, independent.
They use the same. I mean, when I watched the movie 9, I remember distinctively looking over to who I was watching it with and saying, "Oh, this is Trinity all over again." And Neo, as the number 9, still kind of coming to as he's, realizing what's happening slowly,
right.
At his own pace, while she's already like, all right, I don't need to explain it to you. Just, you need to trust, you need to move, and you need to move when I say so. And he's just like, okay, he's never like, well, who are you and why? If anything, they're more of in a state of awe. Right. And sort of like understanding that what's happening internally is instinctive to know who to follow in the lead of this more awakened individual by the eyes being already open, which Neo in this movie are not yet. Right. So, yeah, but that's a great point. I love that you brought that up, since we did cover 9.
I saw that correlation really quickly. And again, I love this aspect, and especially this combination of Sophia, which is going to be something we're really going to get into much deeper in Gnosticism. And this combination of that Luciferian energy kind of coming in here is going to be, again, just a really good kind of head start on kind of what this story is entailing and how unique of a character Trinity is going to be. And she's going to be the one that actually creates trust within Neo. And there's going to be a lot of experiences in the first one. Neo kind of has to almost take some leaps of faith. It's going to be Trinity that's there to give his heart that desire and that guidance. And so this intuitive guiding aspect of the heart, and how she, again, controls so much of the movie, but in her own way, maybe not as direct as what Morpheus would do, but when you argue who's the pivotal character, and I think when we kind of get into the conversation of what I foresee of what the 4th movie is going to be about, if this cycle of these 3 movies are going to run correctly, It sounds like the fourth movie is going to be a focus on Trinity. And I think that's going to kind of help maybe complete the story even further. And so, yeah, we come to Neo, right? And then he wakes up and he's got that message on his screen, right? It says, "Wake up, Neo."
Yeah.
Right?
The Matrix has you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And gosh, it's just so funny because, like, if we can all kind of flash back, and I know some of us are young, so we're not going to remember this, but like what your original definition of the Matrix was, like I was not, when I first saw this movie belonged entirely in science fiction in my mind. It really wasn't. I didn't see the connection.
Yeah, no, I was 12.
Yeah, we were young, and I mean we were more attracted to the dodging bullets and kind of thing. You know what I mean?
The
Like
special effects were really what sold the movie, and
and that's what kind of pulled us in.
Although I do remember, and I'll say this for real, from when I was a kid, I didn't understand why I'll never forget this. I was living in Mexico at the time when this came out, and I remember what I would do is I'd pay a lot of attention to American-made movies and what their dialogues were saying. I just had that kind of need to always know, oh, how was this written? And I've always had that curiosity, but this movie I remember always being dropped. Even if you watch it now, everything that is said has these one sentence sort of mind grenades. And at the time I didn't know what any of that meant. I just remember thinking, like, the way this movie, like, the only time they kind of play out of sort of giving you a lesson are like the parts where you would consider fun, when like there's the simulations and then all that stuff. But they were, for the most part, when you first meet Morpheus, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, they just sort of put these one.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
It's like little nuggets of gold.
Yeah. But I just remember thinking, like, oh, it's a very weird, not a weird way, but it was, to me at the time, again, I didn't understand what was happening. I just thought this is an interesting way to make a movie in order to just get through the scenes. They're just very short. You know what I'm saying? Like, It's like, here's this and here's this. Mm-hmm. And then the next scene. And then it's like, here's what I have to say about what you just experienced on to the next one. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really, you know what I'm saying? But now I know why. Obviously, you watch it again, you're like, oh my God, they're just dropping knowledge from the very get-go. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So that's all I remember at the time when we were kids, is thinking, like, how interesting is the pace. And I thought it had to do with pace. That was it. I was like, oh, the reason they're saying things in such a short burst like that is that they're just trying to keep this movie at a pace that's like, you don't need to think about what's really going on. We're telling you, moving on.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, even when he, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but when he first, after he meets Trinity, I remember, and I just saw the movie again recently, but it's just so obvious, when he ends up, having to be reprimanded for being late to work. And it's just such a telling scene.
Yeah.
So I just remember that, when I watched it again, I was like, oh my God, it's all just right there when, but yeah, let's go back to how he's awoken by Morpheus, right?
Well, yeah, we think it's Morpheus that sent him that message, right? It's that wake up, Neo.
He's, waiting for that connection to Morpheus.
Yeah, and he doesn't even know it at this point, right? Because he's just kind of in his own world. And then that's exactly it. We have he sells some kind of computer hacking program after that message comes up on the screen. And then actually that empty book that he puts the disc in, that was the book that you spoke about. Much of the aspect was, and that was the allegiance that was given to Alice in the Wonderland, because it says follow the white rabbit, and he's offered to go out to that club, and he's really kind of turning it down, and then he sees the tattoo, and he follows that, and there's importance to that. When we see spiritual signs on our path, when you get that urge to, I talk about it that time, I got the urge to go into the Barnes & Noble bookstore. Like, I'm not a big fan of Barnes & Noble. I didn't have the money to buy the book. I did, but it worked out, and that was a life-changing experience, So these little moments in life that grab you, that kind of try to push you a certain kind of way, acting upon those, seeing the synchronicity in these moments, especially as we start approaching this path through spirituality, because we start to see more synchronicities, because we're more open to pattern recognition, because we understand that that's going to be very much a part of this whole experience. And so you're right. We kind of go, we kind of leave, but before we leave, we see the room 101. And that is where Mr. Anderson, or Neo, lives. And this is actually a shout out to Big Brother's room in
1984.
1984. Thank you. I was just about to blank out of what the title of that was.
The worst of your fears.
The worst of your fears. And this is where the main character has to have these experience with rats, because it was rats that was around, I think, his mother when he found her during those very traumatic events of his early life. And there's just something about this room of our darkest fears, and we see this. He's kind of in this depression, low self. But this room 101 goes back to this aspect of what we spoke about with power and control. This matrix that we're going to kind of discover, and we're going to be able to say it in as many ways as we possibly can in the environment we find ourselves in. This matrix doesn't just want power over you. It needs full control. Mm-hmm. Okay, there was something that was very special about that room 101 in 1984, because they have to break you. Mm-hmm. They don't just go and just start killing political prisoners. They need you to bend the knee first. They need you to lose all hope. They need you to break down, and they need you to fully accept the system. And then they'll kill you. And that's exactly what happens in 1984. They wait for you to fall in love with the system, and then they just put a bullet behind you. You know, it's this aspect. It's the same thing we saw with the Game of Thrones of bending your knee. And this is what the esoteric significance is because you really only want to surrender to one power. And that's the universal life force of all life. There's only one power to honor, and it's the universal life, you know? It's the common denominator, right? It's everything else is just really vanity compared to it. So this matrix can't really have you knowing that.
Right.
You know, and we're going to kind of talk about what this matrix is, and Morpheus will kind of explain our role in this matrix and what the matrix kind of feeds from us. But going into this understanding that what we're dealing here is this matrix isn't just looking for power, because you can have power, but you don't have control. There's a lot of politicians today that have power, but they don't actually have control. It's by other means. Like there's, you know, the finances behind them, whatever it is, their cabinet members, whatever it is. But if you have control, you have power.
Yeah, there's to fast forward to make your point. There's the scene where when Neo finally meets Morpheus, it's imperative to know, as he says, "You've always known," and like a splinter in your brain, it's been, the truth has been within you to want to be discovered, and that's the part that Daniel, in my opinion, is referring to being broken. It's like, we don't need you to have that splinter any longer anymore. It's not so much the power over you as much as the control over what controls the will to want to know more and what lies beyond this reality. I think that's the control that people want, is that no longer you have the ability to go seek within what lies behind the veil. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's to me the control they've always wanted, is that they don't want you to have this sort of, because they keep doing it. I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit down the road, but they'll talk about, they'll just disguise as a new source that you have put your faith into and try to beat you before you get there. So just like the New Age movement, we talked about this before we even had the podcast. It's like those who think they've awoken or have leaned into spirituality don't realize that whatever they are trusting into has already been taken over by those who are gaining that control over what you think is the higher source already. And so I think that's what the ultimate goal is going to be, is to have a belief system to be shattered completely. There is no belief system other than into the system, and then you die.
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's just such a good esoteric principle, even isolated from this conversation. You can have power, but you don't have control. Mm-hmm. And so think about that even with yourself. Like, you can have power of compassion. You can have power of intellectual insight. You could have power of craftsmanship. But if you have no control over those powers, they're probably not going to be utilized for their fullest extent and their fullest expression, right? And so the more control that we actually can harness in ourselves, the more power we have. And so what we're going to be kind of seeing with this matrix is all of the control of the life is kind of being changed over into the matrix, and it's being pushed over there. And that's how we've lost our capacity of power. And it's kind of this, even almost this illusion at this point. And so, just that understanding alone, isolated from the conversation that, you can have power and not have control. And then you really don't have any power. But if you have control, you automatically have power.
Right.
It's this whole aspect of really looking at the causal factors of what's actually going to be the means that are going to create that end. And power doesn't create control. Control creates power. And so that's what we're going to be kind of looking at. Not only how we're getting controlled from the external world, but what's controlling us. These agents, we can talk about them all day long as agents of the various institutions in our physical life, but where do these agents come alive within us? Where are these agents that defend this 5 sense reality? Where are these agents that defend the allegiance to these man-made systems?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's within us, because it's just like you said, even our thoughts can be very much influenced. And when we think about the amount of institutionalization we have, one of the big sobering experiences is kind of coming to be like, where are my thoughts? Like, what are my thoughts, and what are the thoughts of my society? What am I getting kind of orchestrated and almost trained to speak and reply to? And you can hear this just in everyday conversations. People, word from word, verbatim, will quote, an article from the internet.
Or even, so like I've talked about this with you before, but when we go back to the episodes of Bloodline, the code that runs through us in our DNA gets revitalized by the lies of history that allow us to believe something that controls us by fear. So in the bloodline and in the code, there was suffering, there has been suffering, but you keep the memories of suffering in order to tell the masses, in my opinion, why we have it better than they did. And therefore, this is why you bend down to the opportunities that are now available to you, which are better than the ones that existed then. And so even when you learn history, the main thing that I remember as a child understanding is, wow, I'm so glad I don't live in those times, because in the times I live in now, it's all good, which by duality makes you realize, or makes you live to the laws of the authority you've put your faith in and energy into, because you're like, they got it right now. So they have it right. Therefore, now it's okay. This is who I need to obey by, because they are looking for my best interest. So I feel like that all is intertangled or intermixed with, the code of memories from the past, but they are in the past in the time that they were in suffering, but they bring them to the forefront to sort of mix them together, be like, no, like if you go back just a little bit enough, you'll know that even your grandparents in the time of the Great Depression, this is what they didn't have, and this is what you have, and we gave you that. Therefore, there's nothing for you to question. And so even when you're just a child, you're already thinking like, oh, I'm just already living in what's better for me. You're already just taking the word of someone else telling you what's better for you. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I feel like that's where we give up our own control, our will is sort of like manipulated to think, no, I'm doing what's best for me. What's best for me is to go by this construct that's been built here before me, because it was built to better the species, which is a total lie, as far as, that being aligned with truth.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, truth doesn't have any say in what the Industrial Revolution did to where we are now in order to live a quote unquote better life. But we accept it as that to be the truth in order to move on.
Yeah, well,
obey,
I mean, even just the aspect how we look at history linear. We look at it in a linear way, like how we're taught to look at it in a linear way.
That's how you're looking at it. You're like, that's what it was. This is what it is, and therefore, there's nothing for me to really think about or question.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so, man, and I mean, to kind of come back just so we could kind of get from that, what that Rule 101 represents, but just that ultimate, it's not just, they're not even just after your mind, they're after your soul.
Oh yeah.
It's not just mind control. And that's what this movie really is. It's kind of really more about not just so much like physical slavery, but more mental slavery.
Well, putting your heart into something that they have given you to put your heart into. That's just awful.
Right. And what are we using that generative force in our will for? And so that's exactly what this is going to kind of come to. They need to take they need to take humanity completely out of humans.
Right.
And that's what this aspect is, and of this demoralization and this teaching us that we're just, cockroaches. And it's this poisoned worldview that they're really trying to kind of spread. I mean, we see later on, which is so interesting, is this poisoned worldview is actually going to turn into a computer virus in the program.
Right.
And it's actually Mr. Smith. And it's this poisoned worldview that actually causes even the machines to be like, wow, this is getting out of hand. And that's exactly kind of what we're seeing generated here. But it's the cremation of care, which is an esoteric ritual that is done. And that's kind of what they want the process to go. So again, we're just looking at this full control. It's not even just a physical slavery that the Matrix is going to be, push onto these characters symbolically,
Right.
but also a mental and a spiritual one as well. And that's kind of what they're working for. And so either way, man, we flash forward, we're at the club, and now we have the coming together of the emotions and the will, right? We have Trinity meeting Neo, right? And that's going to be this perfect experience. And then what's going to which is going to be so great is Trinity is going to be the transporter of the divine will with thought. Right. And now we're coming to almost make this connection. Now the will and the process of thought is going to kind of come together. And that's with Trinity taking Neo on that journey to meet Morpheus.
The will meets the spirit, right? And then the will and the spirit aren't necessarily connected just yet, because even though she says to him that he will meet Morpheus, he wakes the next day to find out that he's late for work. And that's when he finds out that he must really trust his intuition, because he still hasn't met Morpheus.
Right. And we get the phone call. Yeah, absolutely.
But he's also been already sort of put into a haze as far as his thought goes, because he's been reprimanded by the greater authority that we all see in the movie. And in this case, I think it's personified by his boss, who says, you think you're special. You think you're someone who is special from the rest of us. He's like, but we are the most successful, and in order to stay successful, we need everyone to be on the same page. And if you don't follow our pace, then you can see yourself out. And so he's kind of in a fog, sort of just, trying to figure out, okay, this is the world I'm in right now as Mr. Anderson. And he goes back to his desk, and that's when Morpheus reaches him.
Right. And it's through that phone call first, right?
Phone call.
Yes. And then this is kind of this, almost this, this leap of faith that, that our character, Neo, is going to kind of go through, because he sees the agents approaching. There's this aspect of fear. And he's kind of guided by Morpheus to get to this certain spot, but then we see the refusal of the journey, which is something we talk about in the hero's journey, right? There has to be a trying to turn back kind of thing. And this is going to be something that we're going to see Neo go through a lot through this whole experience of, even when after he eats the pill, he kind of asks, can I go back? And Morpheus is like, you wouldn't want to, right? But that's exactly what we're kind of seeing here. We're seeing this hesitation to spiritual development. And we can see this play out in our own lives when we've kind of, taken stuff to kind of keep maybe more of our physical comforts, or aspects that we've avoided areas of growth, or just kind of covered certain things up. And so ultimately, Neo's not going to fully be able to trust Morpheus. And so he surrenders himself to these agents. And then so we have this really cold interrogation scene, where really we kind of see the power, and we really kind of see this aspect that Neo's actually in a situation where he really doesn't have any rights like he thinks he does. He's dealing with a different kind of energy. And this is something that's going to kind of come with even our understanding of the Matrix and what the Matrix is. I mean, just kind of how deep that energy of control kind of goes. And even to the, and this is going to be something that we're going to kind of get deeper and go deeper down that rabbit hole as we kind of continue this journey of our own individual spiritual development. But there's this aspect of fear, and he actually gets something so interesting. He actually gets put that tracking device in his belly button.
Yeah, he's bugged.
He's bugged. And so interesting because it's the connection of the umbilical cord,
right?
The connection back to the source, and actually putting a bug in a tracking device
through
in
his
him.
navel point, yeah.
In his navel point, which, I think very much is that navel point this is the base. This is that Malkuth energy. This is kind of where, childhood trauma can be as well, and so it's going to be really interesting that the sacred feminine is going to be the one that actually pulls that out of him at one point and actually rids him of that pain that's staying in those lower level chakras and right through the umbilical cord, which could represent maybe early childhood experiences, and how we actually use the waters that don't wet the hands, which is the sacred feminine, to heal those wounds and kind of purge us of any kind of negative relationship we have with experiences. And so and
then that scene where, once again, Trinity always, and in the whole movie, you'll see these lines that I was talking about that, when I was a kid and I was watching this, that are just right into the point. But she says to him, finally, face to face, you need to trust me. Because again, he's riddled by fear of knowing that there's something inside of him. But again, she just reminds him, like, it's either now and this is it, or you step out of the car and don't continue this on. So he's got a second chance again to refuse the calling of the journey, and he stays in.
Right. And and it's so fascinating too, because if we think about, so what happens is he gets released from the police, they pick him up, the characters that we've met with Trinity and the individuals that she's traveling with. And you're right, because there's a scene when they like open the door. And she's like, you can leave. Like, if you don't want to do this, but trust me, you've been down that road before. And it's a wet, cold, depressing road. It was cut off from the heart. Do you want to go down that cold road away from your heart and your emotional core? Are you going to further deny the spiritual experience and the spiritual unfoldment that's trying to blossom within yourself?
Right.
And what's the consequences? What good is going to come down going down that wet road by yourself, And so again, the trust of the emotions. We're having this aspect of surrender. What do you surrender to? Again, we can't always be in this domination role, and we can't also be always in the surrendering role. It's this play between those two polarities. But what you surrender to. Well, surrendering to the emotional and the sacred feminine is one of the biggest steps of the alchemical process, and that's what we're seeing him go through at this moment. And that's what's getting him ready, and that's what's going to get him in alignment to the character that we meet next, which is going to be Morpheus. Mm-hmm. And he's really going to represent the law, which is thought, the logos, right? He's going to represent the mind. Right? And this is now the connection of the mind with the divine will connected by the heart,
right?
The sacred feminine. Okay. Making that connection. And then something that we see very early on is these characters aren't going to be all together at once for a very long time. It's going to be, she brings him to meet Morpheus and then immediately leaves. And so the thought needs to meet the will.
Right.
And we need to have this coming together moment. And then, like you were saying, the thought representing Morpheus at this time kind of drops some big nuggets of information in this scene. And probably one of the most famous scenes, I would say, probably from the movies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, everybody has referenced this scene for the last, 20 years since it's been out, and the scene of making the choice, and very much to the point, out of all the colors, in the color wheel, you have the red and the blue, and which choice you take will change the path that'll change his faith, at least, and he gets the last chance. The mind tells him one more time, this is what you're about to see, and then if you want to go out the door and wake up tomorrow and pretend whatever you want to pretend, then so be it. And as we already know, Neo takes the red pill in order to take the next step into what the Matrix is, and that's what the mind is going to, allow him to see for the first time.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's again, that's kind of that red representing that active aspect of consciousness, actively taking those steps to approach truth. And that's we spoke about that. There's this quickening that happens. There's this kickback that happens as we start moving towards the connection with the creator rather than its creation.
Right.
When we make that move, there's a quickening, there's an energy reflection that comes back that's felt immediately. And we're going to kind of start this journey. And I think one of the most important things that Morpheus says at this scene is the aspect that, I'm only showing you the door. Like this isn't going to be a pleasant topic is pretty much what he's saying. Like, this isn't going to be comfortable. It's not going to be rainbows, which, as spiritual individuals, we all know that, you have these moments of bliss and of expansion and enthusiasm that comes with spiritual development and progress. But it's a sickening experience, especially at first.
It's a painful process.
Very, very painful process,
I mean, and all the things we talk about, the rebirth is always very traumatic. The rebirth is like the birth. It's a traumatic experience that you must, go through as many times as necessary, and when it does happen, we talked about this in the 7 stages of alchemy, as you come to one level, you move on to the next, and he's moving into just the very tip of it right now. He's just entering that world.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. He's
deconstruct or reconstruct here. And yeah, we already seen the scene, he wakes in what now really is the real world, the time that he finds himself in the 5 cent construct that, he is created in, and what he's being used for. And that's the scene where he finds himself, unplugging from the Matrix.
Yeah. When he's in those, like, how KFC makes their chicken pods kind of thing. Like, they're just like growing humans, right?
Yep.
And absolutely. And it's these synthetic iPods, right? That are harvesting energy. And that's what we're going to start approaching, is this idea that the machines live off of the energy that's harvested off of humans. And so if we can just take the machines and drop that S, the machine lives off of the harvesting of the humans, right? And so we can kind of understand how this kind of plays. And so quickly after he disconnects from the system, does he get dropped like garbage?
Yeah, pretty much.
The moment he disconnects and is alive, and they notice that they can no longer harvest energy from him, he gets shot down a little like a garbage chute, right? And kind of makes his way down, which is just fascinating. Okay, and we see the confusing aspect again, the confusing, overwhelmed, kind of lost in your own emotions, almost drowning, because he almost does drown when he kind of goes into the water, and it's not, he's rescued by that light that comes from above, right? So this is going to kind of represent kind of spiritual guidance, and he's going to be pulled on a board, and we're going to kind of really get our first glimpse of what the real world now looks like.
Yeah, there's a lot of those scenes where he looks up.
Absolutely. And up, getting a higher perspective. That's another theme that you're right. It kind of is just all over the place in this story. And that's kind of something we're looking to explore. And so this whole aspect of this rehabilitation and kind of building up the eye, building up the body, and really just kind of building all the components again. And it's kind of this rebuilding process and this reincorporating process after our first spiritual awakening, where you really haven't seen before. Because he's like, why did my eyes hurt? And they're like, you haven't seen before. Like, this is the first time you've seen.
As a kid that I was like, there's more to, like, how come they're not saying more to that?
Right.
I remember feeling that way.
Yeah.
They just kind of tell them, like, well, you've never used your eyes before.
You've never used them before. It's going to be this whole aspect of all of these experiences. And we really kind of start to see what this, we're waking up with Neo at this process as well. We're kind of following along with him. And what's kind of interesting is we kind of have the same knee-jerk reactions, especially in the moments that Morpheus is going to kind of continue with, like, the education of Neo. There's going to be some knee-jerk reactions where you're like, oh, well, what not batteries, And then we start thinking about it, and you really start kind of processing it, and you start really thinking about, like, why can the agents morph into anybody, And then you start seeing those connections, and you're just like, holy macaroni, there's something happening here,
right.
And again, this is all happening within. Okay. And so this is the same fear, this aspect of connecting with your thoughts, which is the law, utilizing your emotions and your sacred feminine and your heart and your aspect of care to connect your will with the thought, right? And make that bridge and actually create that Trinity, which Trinity, so beautifully kind of pulls together for these characters, and kind of this completion of the story. But yeah, just this fascinating status. And so we kind of have this rebuilding. We kind of meet some new characters. We kind of meet the Judas character at this moment too. We're going to meet Cypher, who's actually going to be a turd, who's going to turn on us.
You meet him actually at the moment where, again, the divine feminine is trying to nurture that what she knows is going to be an important person in the development of this, or the unfolding of this journey. Remember, she goes to aid Neo as he's recovering, since he's been atrophied and all that other things that are happening to his physical body. But she goes there to make sure that, he has enough. And as she closes the door, boom, you meet Cypher, who blatantly just says, I don't remember you ever, taking care of me when I was, awakened. And she kind of stops and looks at him. There's kind of this tension there for a minute. But you kind of know what probably will come from him. Do you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, even when when they meet him, like his eyes kind of shift a little bit. Like he doesn't hold eye contact. And there's just aspects there. But yeah, we kind of go through this whole kind of journey, and we kind of get this little re-education, and kind of fast forward. He's going to kind of be fast forward and trained, right? Because there's actually, like, you can actually download into the Matrix, and there's all these, like, amazing scenes when he's training and kind of going through all these aspects, but really for this idea that they can kind of create programs within the Matrix, right? And so what we're seeing here is this understanding of the creative principle of the universe, and we partake in creation because we are creators because we partake in creation.
But you can't create unless you free the mind, and that's what he has to start learning from the very beginning. Is just because he has the download, and it may be the aspect or the attributes to doing something physical, doesn't mean it'll get you further in this world unless you free the mind
and gain control, right? Because freeing the mind is gaining control of your own mind, right? And so that comes back again. You can have all the power in the world. He can just type in that judo program and learn, jujitsu, but, like, do you have control over it? Can you actually utilize it? And again, that's going to just resonate with one of those really, really large themes. And so, we're kind of we're making our way through. We have these experiences of training, which again, what we're seeing here is this aspect of the thought training the will. Right. And so we really kind of have Morpheus kind of representing in that triune brain as kind of the training of the R complex. This is kind of the Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is the master learning, just showing him physically how to control his body and utilize his body, where Trinity is going to be more of the education of the heart. Right. And she's going to teach him how to care and teach him what true care is, and the holistic healing aspect and generative aspect of care, where Morpheus is going to be more concentrated on kind of that five sense reality. Right. And so again, we kind of have the teacher, the sun teacher and the moon teacher here, kind of making that situation felt. And, side note about this, of when they're in the real world, It's so funny, man, because this is like a misunderstanding that happens quite often. If I ever hear people talking about the Matrix and they're like, oh, I love the clothes in the Matrix, I always get really jazzed and I'm like, oh, I love those too. Like those big, like oversized sweaters and like the ratty beanies. And they're like, no, we're talking about the cool leather jackets, like when they wear when they're in the Matrix. But to me, I always thought the coolest clothes when they were actually out of the Matrix on the
I think
boat.
that's so interesting you're saying that. I felt the same way.
Don't those look like the most comfortable? Like, how do you get clothes like that?
I mean, it's just, you could tell they're wearing them for no need of fashion, but only of necessity.
But they look so comfortable. Yeah. I'm just like, I'm like, get me out of the Matrix just so I get those clothes. So you get those on, know? Yeah. And like the leather is cool, but the other stuff, that's like...
No, there's a very specific scene, and this is a complete side note and nothing to do with any kind of spiritual game. But there is a scene where I think Neo approaches Tank, who's the guy who knows how to, upload and download all information. And Neo's wearing a sweater long enough to cover the palms of his hands while he's holding like a cup of I don't know, whatever he's drinking. And I'm like, man, that just looks so comfy.
So nice.
I love it. You're saying this, dude. That's so funny. I was like, that's just something I thought I had thought of.
No, that's great, man. I love that connection there, because I've always like
trench coat. I mean,
yeah, I'm always like, oh, there's been a misunderstanding. Yeah. But completely side note, right? So we kind of have these kind of programs. Some great wisdom is kind of shared. And we start to see that Neo's getting tested a little bit, and we're seeing that the limits of his testing is coming of the lack of confidence within his own will, right, in his own mind, right,
which is you can be hurt in the real world if you're hurt, if you allow yourself to be hurt in the Matrix, which is the Matrix sort of having a dominant effect over the mind, right, and so and we saw that first leap of faith, which is the mind killer.
Yeah, fear is the mind killer, right? But that's exactly what we're seeing, and so we kind of have this whole training aspect, and again, this is this whole thing. And Neo's he's just like every other process. He's making his way as the fool does on his journey, right? He's making progress, but he's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so I believe the next kind of character that we're going to kind of cross path is the Oracle, correct? But before we get to the Oracle, we got to talk about Spoon Boy.
Oh, Spoon Boy is great, and actually, before even the Spoon Boy, you learn about the agents. You learn a little more about the agents, and it's
rat sticks. You're right,
but we can go right back to
no.
The Oracle,
let's start with the agents, because I think I
just remember that you kind of understood that there was some malevolent energy going on in the Matrix, and I think it is when Morpheus is teaching Neo to beware of the distractions that are within the Matrix. And in this case, I think it's the woman in the red dress. For that moment, he loses concentration and only to be faced by an agent. And I think Morpheus explains to him, how the agents are everywhere and can be anyone within the Matrix, and why they evade the agents in the first place. So yeah, I mean, if you want to go right into the agents, I mean, they're a character that we kind of brought up in the beginning, but yeah, let's get right into the agents. Anyone who has not been unplugged, right? So
yeah, and that's it. And the agents are going to really represent beyond what their physical representation is in the film. I think the unique thing we're going to see with these agents is that they can form into anybody, and that's this idea of these agents of this Matrix and of this kind of man-made matrix that we find ourselves in. They can be all places, every place, in all things, because just how in universal law, God is in all places and is in all things. If they're mimicking universal law and they're trying to create a synthetic one, well, then they too have to be in all places and all things.
Correct.
And so we're seeing, again, the mirroring of universal laws in a synthetic form, trying to be presented as they're created by them. Right. And so this aspect of them being in all places and all things is just actually them replicating universal law, which again is the same thing the legal system is. It's based off of universal law, but there's certain things that are illegal, but are they unlawful? That's part of the Matrix right there, because it's Why can something be legal in this boundary of land, but if I go to another boundary of land, it's now all of a sudden is legal?
Right.
Even though we could all probably agree on the aspect not being unlawful.
Yeah.
What's going on here? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so
we're
we're
taking the same feeling of what you find in your moral and even your higher level of understanding of principles, and then they've sort of fractured it and put it into small little things that are completely irrelevant to
Right.
The universal laws of the all seeing and all being, to believe that it is part of that same construct. And it's like, no, it's not.
right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. And so the aspect of how these states can be everywhere, how these agents can be everywhere, to the aspect that one of the parts that comes up in this movie is you kind of have to look up like face to face in the mirror at one point and ask if you're an agent. Are you pushing the matrix? Are you holding people back from like finding themselves? Are you in an institution? I know in education, this was something that I struggled with so much that I don't even find myself in organized education anymore because there's a lack of truth being spoken,
Right.
And so in that realm, because students kind of they look up to their teachers for insight. If I can't give them full insight, I kind of feel like I'm being like my words are being taken, almost like Neo in the interrogation room when they actually close his mouth and they limit his speech, which is
Right.
very allegorical to what's kind of happening today. And so, these agents, this could be all things, and it's not just the physical authority control, as the agent. They kind of look like Secret Service in this movie, but it's not. There's agents within the political realm. There's agents within the economic realm. There's agents within the social realm, education. Every component of this, in every component institution within the society, the Matrix is saying they have an agent within to
Right.
kind of make sure that the program stays balanced. And that means, even agents of opposition to the agents are part of those agents.
Right.
Which really starts to make us even think about, other aspects. And again, this is just a story, so I'm sure none of this relates to what's actually happening in life, but gee whiz, it would be crazy if it was, right?
Well, it's funny that we bring that up, the agents, as a representation of the all around judgment that we either feel or face in this five sense construct that you're born into. Then people will know right away, and that's how you make all these camps. You make camps out of the fear of being judged, and wanting to not be judged makes you fall into a state of conformity in order to evade that sort of judgment. So therefore, you kind of never really go too far within and never explore what the meaning of anything is because of the fear of being judged or being outed and being found out by an agent. But that in itself makes you an agent.
Right.
So you know what I mean?
So interesting, and it's just, again, these agents to kind of keep that machine in this really this materialistic kind of aspect that we find ourselves in.
Right.
Because again, if we use I really feel like if we utilize natural laws to set up an economic system, even to set up a political system based off of natural law, there'd be a way to do that. But it's what we're seeing is this like false synthetic copy that's claiming it's based off of that, but it's really just utilizing those principles for more control.
Yeah.
Right. Again, and it comes down with that aspect. They want complete control. It's not just your life. That's not what they're after here. They're playing for souls. They're playing for all the marbles, and that's what we're kind of kind of seeing. And and also just the the destructive aspect of this destruction of care, and how with Agent Smith, the ends justify the means.
Mm-hmm.
This cremation of care that we're seeing is like we talked about. It's a virus that's going to be unkept, and it's going to be uncontrollable at the end. And it's so something that the Matrix kind of put into program and they don't even realize that it's actually going to be almost their own demise, that program.
Right.
Which is that cremation of care, which again is going to be what Trinity is the main display of that care and that component aspect of the heart. And again, let's always retreat back to remember that Trinity represents a component of our own consciousness, just like Neo does and just like Morpheus does, just to make sure we're kind of clear on that aspect. You know, and how the agents are even anything that ties you to the matrix, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not even these institutions, but it's also desire energy, right? With the women in the red dress, you know, that pull, you know, like how the matrix sets up is, you know, even the aspect of success and our addiction to success was set up so you don't actually fulfill your true life components. And they define success in your society so you get to a certain point and you just coast. That's not by accident. You know, the idea that we have this defined success and really powerful individuals like the high members up in this matrix, they don't care 2 cents about success. Okay, they don't care 2 cents about perceived power because remember, it's all about control. Right. It's all about the will. Okay. And so again, you hear about it when the agents talk about this. They're able to do this to the people in the matrix because they think the people in the matrix are pathetic. You know, they're just like, you're scum. Like, we made it perfect and you guys couldn't handle it. And so we had to make it like this. And it's kind of this viewpoint of the machines in the matrix and how they view humans. Right. And it's that really poisoned worldview of, you know, you deserve this. And you're not really living. So why would it matter that you die? Everything's going to die anyways. What's the big deal if we speed you up? Right. You know, or, you know, how do we kind of just generate your energy, which they're really going to kind of get filled on. And so, so interesting kind of aspect we had with the agents, but I know you have a lot of information too, man. So did you have anything else you wanted to add about the agents at this point? I know it's going to keep coming up, you know, and it's just going to,
you know, they're part of, you know, the breakdown into all 3 of the films. But no, I like that we were heading into, if we can take a step away from the agents and move back to what is perceived by Neo as reality, and how he's still learning how to free his mind. And you find that when he goes to see the Oracle, you know, he goes to the Oracle's house, and the first thing he meets is a boy who can bend spoons. And the boy simply says to him, you know, you can't really bend the spoon. You have to bend your mind to bend the spoon. And that's when he kind of starts to realize, like, okay, there's something to this now, you know? And that's a very important lesson that you have to understand, because again, even when he tries to fly, even when he thinks, oh, I have an understanding that this is a code, the code is the matrix, it's a world that's not really, you know, it's a world that has been constructed, I can probably do whatever I want. But if he doesn't believe it to be, then he still falls, you know, victim to the rules of the matrix. And that's the first. So then he gets another chance at that when he meets the boy. And again, we've talked about that. The voice of God being a child, you know, you have this child who simply just says to him, you know, don't try to bend the spoon, you know, don't, by trying to bend the spoon, you won't succeed, you know, bend your own reality to it.
He says, there is no spoon.
There is no spoon.
And it's like,
yeah. Which is a great scene, because again, it's none of the characters in the movie or in the story that are opening his eyes to that. Again, it's a young child that's of course kind of opening his mind to that. So, but yeah, then he meets the Oracle. So if you want to kind of take it from there.
Yeah. And you know, and this is kind of that Empress card when we first meet her, and it's that the wise counsel, right?
The intuition of
intuition.
Right?
Yeah. And we're really going to see that this is actually the counter to the architect who we'll meet kind of later on. And this is she considers the chaos factor within the matrix. And she's the Oracle. And with that aspect of that sacred feminine, because we have such an understanding of patterns, it's said that the Oracle can see the future because she very much understands patterns, which is something when we connect to that intuition and that holistic side of the brain that we too can perceive more of and call that capacity into our lives. And so the Oracle is going to really be the most unique character, I would say, because the Oracle is, the Oracle represents also that aspect of yourself that you're only going to be as ready for as much as you're ready for. You know, and that's going to be something that is going to be resonating. She's only going to tell Neo through that whole experience what he's actually capable of handling and what he's ready for. Right. And that's going to be a unique kind of aspect when it comes to even the distribution of wisdom knowledge. You know, like even if somebody's listening to this a past podcast, if they're not ready for something, or not even this podcast, say a different podcast, say they're listening to the podcast, and if they're not ready for the wisdom that maybe the individual sharing on that, it doesn't matter. It's not even going to get put into their ears. It's just going to kind of go right by them. So you're only ready for the lesson, you know, you're ready for the lesson that you're ready for. And that's exactly what she's going to perceive. And it's all through feeling with her. It's all kind of through, again, not approaching the system directly, not approaching the conversation directly, in a very kind of, you know, a unique kind of entry that she kind of does. And really, there's this famous scene where she's just like, you know, she points to the sign that says, "Know thyself." And really saying that this is going to be the beginning and the ending of this work, but very much tells him like, hey, maybe it is you, but not in this life.
Yeah, you're waiting for something.
You're waiting for something, right? What are you waiting for? And again, this shows the spiritual progress of Neo. Like, we kind of wanted to just jump in and be like, oh, but he's a one. Like, there's going to be this destiny thing.
He's figured it out.
Right. But there's this whole process we're moving through. And this actually kind of, you know, it fulfills the self-fulfilling prophecy that he was already having for himself of like, oh, I'm not the one, right? And it's going to kind of start this whole chain of events, because obviously in the process of them heading back to the real world from the Matrix after meeting the Oracle,
right,
that's where we have the situation when Cypher kind of sells them out. There's a fight scene, and Morpheus is captured. We lose a couple members because Cypher kind of kills some of those individuals.
Which, but again, we didn't go back to, and just to close the door on him, but I mean, a very specific individual that we'll find in our world. That's the world, the individual who understands the construct but refuses the calling and decides to go back and turn his back. Right. And there's nothing but, you know, consequences with that. And he even says it. He's like, "Why couldn't I have just taken the blue pill?" Right.
And, you know, and he's kind of has that allegorical story of selling your soul, because remember, they're telling him he's going to wake up as like a famous actor.
Yep.
You know, and so he's not even going to wake up and know what he did. So it's like the washing of the hands and this aspect of selling the aspect of truth for material gains. You know, where does Cypher come up in our own lives? What things actually justify our spiritual decline? You know, what things do we actually physically surrender to that affects our spiritual development? You know, this is all things we kind of want to look at, even if it's just fears. You know, what keeps us pulled to this matrix?
Right.
You know, and again, we're going to kind of approach this matrix. We're kind of approaching it as this like physical construct at this aspect. But, you know, when we get into Gnosticism, this matrix is going to, it's going to probably be the same kind of, you're probably going to have how the Gnostics view the matrix. You're probably going to kind of have the same experience that Neo feels when Morpheus is first teaching him about how he's a battery and he actually throws up. You know, Cypher's like, he's going to pop, and he actually does. He actually kind of throws up and passes out. And that's what kind of comes with some of this information. And so, you know, we to kind of talk about that moment, because again, we're just chatting about this movie and things are coming up, and I know we're kind of not staying linear, but time isn't linear. So look at us. But if we do kind of go back a little bit, when he does get explained, he does have that like throwing up moment when he's like overwhelmed by information. This is probably something you almost want to happen in your life at least once a solar year. You need to our belief systems always need to be challenged. Like we can believe in truth and love and universal life, but other than that, these all belief systems need to be looked at. All of these aspects need to, and we need to be able to have sobering moments like that,
Right.
where everything kind of gets shattered and built anew. And so, not saying your whole worldview has to change, but we want to go through those breakthroughs. We want to go through those moments of almost being overwhelmed by new information, even if it's scary at first, because there's always all information can be used for the betterment of humanity if it's used and transmuted in the right way. Even the worst of the junk that you might find and hear about what might be happening behind closed doors some places, even as scary as it is, that energy in some way, in some root at the seed of it, can be transmuted for the expansion of consciousness.
Correct.
Right?
And we always talked about going up that next octave, and the only way to do
Right.
that is to just have another, unfortunately, but very fortunately, spin around the path of the alchemist, once again, just because you figured it out doesn't mean there's not another level to rise above to. And to figure that out, you need some harsh, unfortunately, some harsh experiences. So yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying.
And again, we'll fast forward back to where we were, which was like Cypher kind of selling out and just that,
Right.
that aspect. I love how you brought that up of,
But he gave go ahead.
no, what were you going to say?
I was saying, well, he gave up the mind to the
Yeah.
agents. So now the agents have the mind, which is Morpheus.
Mm-hmm.
And now once again, we find the only two who seem to be, in conjunction. You have Trinity, the heart, the soul, or the love, working in conjunction with the will to go get the mind back as it's been taken by the agents. And it's what the agents want too, right? They want to get up and close to Neo. And Neo decides, okay, we're going in.
Right.
And we're retrieving back,
We're retrieving the thought. We're retrieving the mind. We're freeing the mind, right? We're cutting the strings, Geppetto.
Yeah,
we're cutting that aspect, and we're going to free our father. This is the same idea of when Pinocchio has to free his father from the whale of the belly. That's exactly what we're going into in this situation. And yeah, we're going to free the mind. That's what this journey is. What is the Matrix? The Matrix is control, and it's mostly mind control, because it's hard to physically control people. They learn that really in the kind of this communist regimes in the 20th and the fascist regimes in the 20th century. It's very hard to physically control people. Now, when you can control the mind, then they start putting actions into place, controlling themselves, and that's kind of what this system is kind of built off of. And so this is definitely the freeing of the mind from the constricting systems of synthetic hierarchy that's created in this what we're talking about with this story. But yeah, the freeing of the mind, and we have this, and we have the divine will starting to also believe slowly in the creation of courage, the creation of sacrifice at this point, because they're going to put themselves in really a suicide mission to go retrieve him. And then we have these famous scenes that kind of lead up to this.
Well, something that you said that kind of goes right with it. You were just talking about the when he throws up, that from that scene, if you move forward to after he retrieves, the mind, he is shot in the heart. And that's when he dies. He physically dies, and he is brought back by Trinity.
Right. And so we have this whole, because we have this whole scene of him saving Morpheus, right? And they actually take a helicopter up to get Morpheus, right? After they have this huge fight scene. And so they have this whole fight scene, which again, Trinity is the most poised and in control in. And that's something we wanted to kind of highlight about that sacred feminine energy. And so we have this movement up the building, and the mind is stored in the highest aspect, which is Morpheus. And we see that they actually ride the elevator up, and then they're actually going to take a helicopter to get Morpheus. And we have this, again, this leap of faith, and we have this leap of faith that's going to happen because Morpheus is all kind of drugged up and stuck to machines. They kind of break through the window, and Morpheus is running. Neo realizes that he's not going to make it, so they jump. Neo's kind of tied to the helicopter, and they have this leap of faith meeting in the air, and that's that divine leap of faith between the law, which is thought, coming together with the will, right? And we have this really, really powerful connection. And then what we're going to do is, kind of have this final scene where they get the mind, they get Trinity back, and Neo, the will, is the last one to come. And then you're right, we kind of have this gunshot scene
left
happen
behind where he needs to. And the reason I brought that up is you're talking about the sacrifice that he has to make.
Yeah.
So he knows that for the importance of the mission, the heart and the mind must be protected. So they leave first, and he has to finish, what he started on his own with no help at all. And that's how he has to sort of conquer and divide himself, is to sort of finish that end piece of the hero's journey in this case, which is like, this path that you do walk alone when you need to, really realize the importance of why you're here. And that's the moment he has a breakthrough. But before he has a breakthrough, he must die.
Right.
And that's how he dies.
And then you perfectly nailed it. How does he get revitalized? It's the kiss of Trinity. It's the touching of the heart, and it's that revitalization of that heart. And you're right. We have this death and this rebirth, and now he's rebirthed, and now he knows through that rebirth. And he says those really powerful words. He says no. Mm-hmm. Right? And the agents look at him, and now he's actually able to see the Matrix for what it is with that rebirth. So he's been reborn with new eyes, right? And he can actually see the landscape for what it is, which is the whole process that this movie's kind of been calling to the intention, is to actually see the landscape for what it is. And you're right. He's able to actually, drop and stop the bullets, right? Which is so interesting because, he asked Morpheus at one point, he's like, does that mean I can dodge bullets? He's like, when you get to the point you need to, you won't have to. And that's exactly what we see, right? We see he actually stops them. They all drop to the ground. And then he actually goes and runs and jumps into the heart of Agent Smith and actually explodes him from the inside. And this is, two big things that happen in that last scene. One, the aspect of no, that power that Neo says with no. Again, a very powerful word. That's something that Passio in his explanation really went into a lot of detail.
Right.
And, no is such a powerful word because we always talk about it in spirituality. Spirituality isn't just about creating new patterns. It's about destroying old ones. And that comes with no. And this story has it kind of saying no to control. And actually the aspect of how do we actually stand up to it without having to recall to bullets kind of thing. It's just the aspect of just pulling yourself out of the system, and then actually trying to change the system from the heart center.
Which is the greatest fear of the agents within the Matrix.
Right.
You figuring that out.
Right. Which is like, you go within, and it's all about that within aspect. And that's exactly it. Because at the end of the movie, we kind of have this whole little dialogue, and he talks about it like, I'm here to end your control, your mind control. Like this isn't going to happen anymore. And so fascinating too, because, even how the screen comes up, the last letters we see is M and F for maybe that masculine, feminine energy. But again, a really unique telling of a story, and really it almost could have ended right there. Like we didn't really know that I think they announced there was going to be a sequel, but it's kind of a completion right there where they could have ended the story right there.
Right.
We're thankful if they didn't, because there was kind of more components that came afterwards. But that aspect and that kind of that completion of what is the Matrix? Well, the Matrix is control.
Right.
And it's mostly mind control. And how does that kind of operate within us? And again, looking at how the Matrix has you, not in any ways that you might even think, and we could be very independent people, but always checking those strings, checking those strings and cutting those strings from Geppetto and making sure we aren't getting our energy taken. Where do we surrender that energy to? We surrender that energy, and the only thing we surrender to is natural law, the sacred feminine and natural law. And We surrender that energy by learning her laws, i.e. creation, and abiding by them. We know we cannot not surrender to natural law. There's no going against natural law, right? And so we take our will to align ourselves to that. And that's kind of what this kind of surrendering does. And that's really what this is showing us. To break out of this mind control is going to be the balancing of those two hemispheres of the brain, which is the masculine and the feminine. And that's really going to be kind of represented by our two characters of Neo and Trinity.
Correct.
Right. And just that beauty of the will.
So yeah, man. So I think, I think we've done a really interesting job at sort of expressing not just the first of the movie, but the why of the first chapter of this trilogy, and now moving into the second, which we already talked about, would be the how. How we got to the Matrix, and we figured out why we are here, or why the Matrix exists. Now we're going to express why we are here and how we got here. And so yeah, the second movie, immediately you find out that outside of the Matrix is a whole civilization of people that Morpheus had kind of talked about in the first chapter, and that is Zion. Mm-hmm. And there's no coincidence on why it's called that, but we can kind of start there and then move on to what's going on within this group of the last group of humanity that remains, that hasn't been taken over or eradicated by the machines.
Yeah, no, awesome, man. I think that's a great intro. And, even I love this talk about what Zion represents. And again, right when we say that name, I'm sure everybody kind of has their own reference of probably what that's going to signify. And also just to allude to that point, this movie starts with the same aspect of the sacred feminine in distress, Neo sleeping. And so again, this is going to be in all three films. I'd be interested to see if this is a component that's in the fourth one, or if they flip it. But again, we'll kind of see on that. And so, but yeah, we look at this idea of Zion and what Zionism is going to Zion is going to represent in this story. And even just the aspect of what Zion represents, it's this spiritual center within the individual. And so we all have a spiritual center even within ourselves that termed in kind of mystical Hebrewism is kind of to term Zion. And so it's going to be this spiritual significant, and it's kind of this holy place. And that's exactly what this is going to represent in this story, is this the last birthing place of humanity. And there's actually individuals in here who were not even born in test tube little incubators. Yeah. They were actually free world born. Which is just kind of interesting, and when what that kind of means in the effects of that. But yeah, did you have anything you wanted to add about with Zion and that aspect?
No, I mean they make it very evident that where Zion lies is the core. It's where the warmth is. It's away from the cold world that is above them. Run by machines. And I think back to the thing I said earlier in this, is that they just lay it on very thick with just a very few words and a period right after. And it's like, this is what it is, and then moving on. And so I think that's obviously done intentionally to sort of let like where it's, what it's alluding to, and what the importance of the overall theme of that is, versus kind of where is it geographically, and how did we get here, and how many years have we been living here? It just doesn't kind of really cover that so specific, just the importance of,
Yeah. And, in two, we kind of get this enthusiasm and this excitement of this rebel underground. And we see that there's actually more individuals that are waking up. And so there's almost comfort for the individual that's going through this journey, because there's power in numbers, and we're seeing that this isn't just an isolated thing, and there's this whole experience that's kind of getting created here. But yeah, in the Kabbalah, the Zion represents the spiritual center of an individual and the spiritual center of creation, more importantly. And so this is where the new world is going to be created, that they're looking to make away from the machines and away from this kind of matrix. And and so we're kind of coming to see that there's these foundations. There's actually a resistance to this, which is always empowering. And One of the things too, when we kind of talk about anytime the word Neo is used in this film and it's used as the savior, what they're referring to there is the application of that universal unity consciousness.
Right.
So that, that activation of, so when they talk about Neo being the savior and Neo being the one, they're talking about the true savior being our balanced consciousness of our own psyches. And that's actually going to be what our savior is. And that's, again, we're going to kind of see the fruit bear that through the rest of this, this conversation. But, one of the things too is there's strong tenets in Zion of strong human principles, of even the aspect of the fear is the mind killer.
Right.
And we have a great speech that's made by Morpheus in this aspect to really just say, we are not afraid. And that's going to be a huge component in shaking off any of this, any of the areas that we feel like we're giving energy to that we don't want to give energy to. Well, facing that and being fearless is going to be the best steps to alleviate that loss of energy, of that Dracula. Because remember, the vampire, it pulls you in with vanity. Mm-hmm. It pulls you in with desire, pulls you in with vanity, pulls you in with things. And we don't even know that it's actually sucking our blood until it's too late, kind of thing.
Right.
Right. And so that's exactly what we're going to kind of see, and how what this Zion kind of represents, and even just how the characters outside of the ones that we know, like we see this evolution of humanity in Zion, but also Agent Smith has new capacity and capabilities in this film. Is that correct?
Yeah, he tries to. Well, he learns that he needs to go for the heart. He knows that he needs to understand how to, take over and really just, hit it where it really hurts, and hit the heart hard, and poison the heart really. So it's an interesting. You have another character that they bring up into the movie as well. And that's Vane, and then we'll kind of unfold what he does, but yeah, I mean, he's kind of after something more intentional now that he understands that more individuals are waking up, and by waking up, they need to, reach into the heart. So
right.
He's like, okay, I need to go and poison where this generative force comes from, mm-hmm. before it becomes something that actually moves and pushes through.
Right. And this is, again, why we now get more significance, why Trinity is always under attack in all the first three movies, because that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to poison this generative aspect of the heart, and its ability. And yeah, so now what we're actually seeing is that Agent Smith, it's not so much he can take the form of other people, but now he can actually duplicate himself. And you're right. It goes by putting his heart in there. And this kind of really represents what they were talking to in that presentation about the expanding of this toxic worldview and this cremation of care happening on a kind of a global level. Right. Okay. And so we're going to kind of see, again, this breakdown. And again, this is really going to be the ultimate villain throughout this story. It's not going to be the architect. It's not going to even be, the other agents. It's going to actually be this computer virus that is Agent Smith. And so, again, this second film really was concentrating on the why are we in the Matrix. And it's really looking at those causal factors, and those causal factors that make us do what we do as an individual, as a community, as a collective. We have to understand, and even through the spiritual process, you have this awakening, and then you have this whole experience and this whole phase where you really have to dig down and really understand the base drives and desires of our behavior. And that's what we're looking at here. Again, we can look at this as a dystopian future novel. We can look at this as a science fiction, or you could just look at it as our own spiritual progress. But you have to understand what drives our behavior. Causal factor of what drives our behavior is going to give us an understanding of how we got into this situation.
Right.
It's all going to go back to what the Oracle said. It all comes back to know thyself. If you understand what drives your behavior, you're going to get a better understanding of what drives your neighbor's behavior. Okay. Or you're going to have a better You're going to be more accepting maybe of what drives their behavior. You're going to be less challenging to it and more supportive. But this is this aspect. It's this really inward journey. You know, no, we're going to meet some interesting characters, but this segment, this part of the story was really looking kind of uncovering those locked doors of our mind. Right. If this was anything, I think this would be almost like the shadow work of this component, right? Because the first one is really the accumulation of the will, the awakening of the will, you know, the connection of the three aspects working together. And now we're utilizing the thought, the emotion, the action to kind of uncover what are, you know, why are we in this situation that we're in? And we really need to all ask our own personally ask ourselves, you know, why is society in this position it's in? And why did we know, how did maybe we help that get into this position? And, you know, how can we kind of help not get into this position in the future?
We've been given these false choices that I like that Passio talks about, but something that we've talked about multiple times on the series here on the first and second season is if you understand what drives the individual and you lack the purpose, then the sort of buffet of choices is there for you to put in your will into something that is completely irrelevant to the betterment of humankind. And so what I mean to be more specific and not so vague is, you know, you put your faith and your energy into this color or this camp or that camp in order to fill this fulfillment that we all have, that we're born with, which is the purpose to generate love and truth. But you now have it placed into something that is made of plastic. And so, you know, the false choices that we're given are controlled by the same two hands. You know what I mean? One is just on the right and one is on the left, but they're both driven by the puppeteer, you know, and understanding who that puppeteer is imperative for this journey that, you know, Neo finds himself in, even though he's already understood, you know, what the Matrix is and the why of it, but now really taking the next step into, you know, what makes, I think, the next character that they talk about, which is the keymaker, you know?
Right. Absolutely. And I think that kind of goes with so much of what we're kind of looking at, because we're unlocking aspects of our consciousness right now. And so we kind of need to find our own key maker,
right,
to kind of get through some of those back doors in our subconscious. And so, yeah, we kind of have this meeting with this key maker, but we have a interesting connection first, because the key maker is currently in the custody of an individual that they called the Merovingian.
Right.
And so the Merovingian is a very interesting name, because this is a very old occult family's name in...
it existed.
It still exists. Yeah, it still very much exists. And so, you know, very interested that they actually chose one of those kind of 13 bloodlines to look into. But we really do have this kind of explanation here of, you know, a different kind of agent of the system.
Right.
You know, this is more of what you would call that dark Luciferian, kind of the controller of the other agents, right? It's not, you know, I know he kind of has a lot of this kind of Satanist Hades kind of approach to him. But a lot of it has to do with this aspect of kind of a dark Luciferian feel.
Well, you were talking about how the dark Luciferians, we were talking about how Luciferians wouldn't even do the bidding. They'll let the Satanists do the bidding.
Right. And that's exactly
kind of what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Now he's definitely, and, you know, even how the Merovingian, you know, he pushes the story along. And a lot of the times through these films, you have to look at what the villain says as well, because they're giving some really good insight, you know, and that's exactly when we talk about this movie being the why, you know, why are we in the Matrix? That's all you hear throughout this film is, but why? You know, right. So he, you know, they approach him and he's just like, and they're like, we came here to get the key maker. And he's like, yeah, but the key maker is an ends. Like you have to tell me why you need the key maker. You know, if you don't have why, you have no power.
Right.
And so what he's kind of addressing there is causality in the aspect of cause and effect.
Exactly.
And the power that kind of comes with that. And how the why is actually the most powerful thing we can do, because if you don't understand the cause of something, there's no amount of medicine's going to fix the problem.
No, they tell him choice is the illusion.
So, and that's exactly it. And, and that's going to be something that what we're going to see is kind of the dark Luciferian kind of murking up the water there, because Morpheus is correct. Morpheus is like, no, there's choice, there's free will. And he says, no, but your choices are limited by me. And so when you have choice within the matrix, no, you really don't. You're kind of picking between, it's kind of like when, it's between red and blue.
That's what I was saying earlier. Yeah.
It's this illusion kind of because
right.
if you really start thinking about it, the left ring and the right ring, it's the same bird. It's the controlling financing industry behind it. It's kind of this, what they would call in this movie kind of the matrix, but he's really just saying, if you don't have the why, you have no power. And so this is a deep esoteric understanding. Like, if you guys don't watch any of them, I would go back and watch this scene, because that's exactly what he's entailing. He's saying, until you have the why, don't come to me.
Right.
Because that's what you dead is what they would call it. This is why you unsophisticated are not on our level. You don't understand cause and effect. You guys just live the same pattern. You don't even know that the things you think are the things we tell you.
Right.
The things we tell you to eat, that's what you eat. It's this aspect of you don't have any control, actually. Like, we've given you the illusion of free choice, but we've got so much control here. And because we have so much control, we have so much power that now you're just going through the process of free choice, but it's not truly there. And again, that's the big choice that we're going to see in the end is it's the free will that they can't control is the choice between love and fear. And that's what we're going to kind of see these characters kind of accomplish. And so, again, who actually kind of saves that day there is because the keymaker, the Merovingian's not really given ground, but what's that? Persephone, that's it. Thank you so much, Persephone. Of course, the female that gets kidnapped down to the Hades, the wife of Hades, and so we kind of have this aspect with the keymaker having to have a unique key for a door, which is really talking again about the subconscious aspect. And then within this, we're going to have this fight scene. The keymaker is going to be sacrificed, and we're going to have this aspect of where Neo is actually going to meet the architect for the first time. Right. And we kind of have this this whole aspect of Neo kind of learning that he's actually just a program. Right. And so there's some really deep information, and it's kind of it kind of takes the enthusiasm out of the room, because now we kind of feel like we've all been lied to throughout these first two films. Like, here's the architect telling us that, Neo is not the one. And this is actually where choice comes back up again, because he's talking to the architect, and this is when the architect informs him that this isn't even the first Matrix. This is like the sixth creation, right? And he was talking about at first how it was perfect, and they've had to recreate it because there's always this program. And he's like, and the problem is, and Neo knows it, and he says, it's choice. It's the choices within the system that cause it to fail. And so it's so interesting because he kind of gives him the breakdown that says, no, the one is just to return back to the source, to repopulate the matrix, to take 23 people, which is again a very esoteric and occult number,
right?
The number of escape, and you're going to escape this, and you're just going to restart the program. But the problem is Trinity, through this whole experience, seeing that there was trouble, has actually gone back into the matrix, and now she's in distress. And we have this aspect of Neo having to make a choice.
Right.
He can either go one way and restart the matrix and repopulate it with 23 people, or he can go the other way, which is ensured the death of all of humanity and try to save Trinity. And he doesn't even think about it. He just kind of completely starts walking to Trinity. And the architect is like offended by this. And he's just like, that's your guy's biggest power and it's your biggest demise, is like love, the program of love. And that's exactly it. We're going to have Neo's going to go. He's going to go and try to save Trinity. Trinity is shot through the heart. And so now we have this aspect of Neo sticking his hand in there and actually restarting that heart.
Right,
and so
pumping the heart back for her.
It's just so interesting now how these components of the feminine saving the masculine, and now the masculine is saving the feminine, but it's all through that connection of the heart. It's all through this generative aspect of care.
And create balance.
And they create that balance, right? And so we have this rebirth again. And so now Trinity has been reborn. And so again, now we're really starting to see that this is kind of, again, this is about one person's psyche, but we have two kind of heroes' journeys kind of formulating right side by side, and they're going to be kind of partnered throughout the experience. But this is probably one of the most important aspects of the story, is Morpheus now has to be informed that his whole prophecy, everything, his belief system that he's built up, might not be as genuine as he thought it was.
Right.
And kind of the breakdown. And this is so interesting because we're going to kind of lose that father-son connection between Neo and Morpheus. We're not going to so much see it in the third movie.
Yep.
They're on each other's side, and he sees that there's power, but all of a sudden there's kind of some enthusiasm is going to be lost. And it's actually going to be so interesting. It's not going to be Morpheus's belief in the prophecy that's going to power Neo through. It's going to be the evolution of Morpheus believing in the prophecy to evolving that to just believing in Neo, away from the prophecy, just believing in this one individual who is trying to change the world. Right?
Well said.
And so, kind of just an interesting thing. And again, I know we kind of shot through the second movie there. But again, a lot of this aspects of this why component. Why are we in the Matrix? Well, it's the why is because we don't have an understanding of causality.
Right.
We lack the understanding of causal factors and how to work from that realm of causality rather than reaction.
Right.
But in the society that we live and feed on a reaction, and we don't even realize how we're in that flow state so much, and how, when we even think about causality and reaction, cause and effect, even how our relationship with dopamine right now in the Matrix. Dopamine is supposed to be released when you complete a cause of worth.
Exactly.
So dopamine is the problem, though, is you get a dopamine response by, say, building yourself shelter. Well, you don't get the same dopamine response, but you still get a little hit of that by watching a video of somebody else building shelter. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. And so even our, this aspect of causality and reaction, even how we are almost addicted to the reactionary dopamine kind of sensitivities at this point of like how we get stuck in YouTube, tunnels, and you're just watching videos, or like in TikTok, how you're watching the young kids just kind of swipe up and down. We're awarding ourselves with dopamine without any causal factor for that dopamine to be expressed.
There's no process. The process that it's meant to take you through is completely butchered,
circumvented,
just botched, and then, but it's still given to you as a trickery of thinking, well, it's been completed, and it's not been completed. I really liked your analogy to the completion of a structure within the like say the YouTube verse of another individual. It's like, I remember meeting people for the first time who have children. I don't have any children of my own yet, and they were telling me how their children are obsessed with children opening presents. And they said, I never thought I'd look at this phenomenon where I brought my kids presents and they literally could care less that they have a present. They'd rather see others react to the presents that they're getting. It's like you're never going to meet that person, but you like the reaction, the completion of the story. But it's condensed in such a quick fashion now that we have the ability to fast forward as well. Because if you watch any video that has a completion from beginning to end, you're always wanting to get to the end to get that response. And so that's kind of what the trade-off we're living in right now. And by that, we neglect the process of our own growth. And I don't think you're going to grow by opening your own present. That's not a great example, but I'm just saying, just shows that the availability of these dopamine reactions are more and more dominant in our society, to where we're neglecting our own process of learning how to evolve.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of those things that if we don't evolve our energy, where's our energy going?
Right.
And so keeping us in kind of this dumbed down reactionary state is just a great way for those plugs into the battery terminals to kind of suck them dry.
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of what we're looking at. And so again, this causality, what is the causal factor of the situation I find myself in? Again, we could look at this emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, but getting to the actual causal factors, because without that, you're in the dark and you're not really searching for anything. And so it's a conversation we have many times on this, but this was really strengthened by this movie and understood just how important this played in the eventual completion of this trilogy.
Yeah. I mean, what leads towards the end of the trilogy is simply Neo having an understanding that just because of the news he's been given, to where he has made a choice now to understand what is the Matrix and how the Matrix works and how he has dominated the world of the Matrix, he now brings back that information to the five sense construct that he lives in, which he actually executes true power for the first time without being in the Matrix, by stopping the machines that are sent to kill all of them. But it's such higher power to the level that I don't think he even understands. It puts him into a coma, and that's how the second movie ends is him being in a coma, because he actually learns how to use that for himself, but he's so unfamiliar with that power in the real world that it takes a toll on him, which still goes back to what you're saying about this example of the dopamine effect. It's like, if you don't know how to generate kindness and care, and all you do is watch videos of people doing that in other places of the world, it might give you the satisfaction that you've done something for the greater good of humanity, but you actually have not.
Right.
And until you know how to do that for yourself, then you'll feel the actual ramifications or the actual power exchange between you giving something of yourself to another individual who may need your help in the real world versus watching it on YouTube. And, and that might be great too for inspiration. It's good to watch that maybe once in a while and say, oh, look, this is what an act of kindness looks like. But until you actually do it for yourself, will you know what that really feels like? And when you actually have that happen to you, will you be able to sustain that feeling long enough to know how to harness it and continue using it? You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of a weird example to, make a parallel with him going into a coma. What he does is completely different than just an act of kindness, but you know what I'm saying? It's just like, if we lose that ability, we won't even know how to really go about it when it's face to face with us. We might just freeze up. But in this case, he does that. He goes into a coma, and that's what leads us into the third, and that's him coming. Now he needs Trinity to come to his aid.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're in this. So we transition from that second movie to the third movie, and it's exactly the same situation. We have the female in distress, and we have Neo asleep. But you're exactly right. This transformation and this savior it's actually going to be Trinity that's going to kind of wake him up from the unique program, because he's like stuck in a train station. It's really interesting. And we kind of see this whole aspect.
Between worlds, right?
He's in between worlds. Yeah. And so he's in between worlds, and we're kind of stuck there. And it's Trinity who's going to kind of pull him out. And that's actually another scene we go with the Merovingians. Yeah. And we go face to face with the Merovingians to kind of meet them again. And they're face to face with him. And he says, oh, I want the eyes of the oracle. If you want Neo, I want the eyes of the oracle. And Trinity just pulls out her gun and puts it through his head, which like makes this amazing scene because everybody pulls out their guns and everybody has guns to each other's head. And she's just like, I'm ready to die right here. And I don't care if everybody else dies, but I know you're going to die. And this snaps into the Merovingian's head of like, okay, like I get what I get what you're putting down right now. Like that's love. You're working on a different kind of energy. And it's funny that the computer programs recognize love when they see it. And they're just like, I understand what this is. This is a powerful force. It's kind of like in The Princess Bride when they're like, it's true love. Yeah. It can't get in the way. And that's exactly what we're kind of seeing. And so she gets this aspect of Free and Neo. And then this one is, this is a little bit more of a technical one. It's because it's kind of the war in Zion. So it's much more focused on Zion. So we have a lot of new introductions of characters, new kind of different plot lines just to kind of pull the whole story together. But it's the story, even though we have all these new great characters kind of introduced, it's very much still just Neo and Trinity is kind of the main aspects.
Yeah, and I think that's why people, what's interesting is that you can go see the last two movies before you see the resurrection, the fourth, but I think overall we've covered the same pattern over and over and over again. And I think that's interesting because it never felt like the blockbuster industry, if you will, pushed on the second and the third onto people where it's like, oh, you better, not like it is right now. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Which should tell you something. If this fourth has, anything, it has probably, it's probably been waiting to be released because of where we might find ourselves in right now as we speak in society and this world. And I think it will have an impact on us, unlike the second and third. This will have an impact on us like the first might have. So, again, I think I'm not saying don't go see the second and the third before you see the fourth. I'm simply saying the understanding that Daniel and I are having right now in this conversation has been, kind of explained over and over as the importance of this balance, between, Neo and Trinity and the same patterns that they face in order to keep evolving through the three questions that make this series. The three, which are...
Yeah, and so it's like, what is the Matrix? How did we get into the Matrix, which is the second? And then the third is, how do we get out of the Matrix?
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of what we're seeing here. And this is exactly what is going to be... like what Neo and Trinity are going to kind of take us on this journey, because they are going to kind of branch off. They're going to kind of go on a sacrificial, almost suicidal mission to actually go to the heart of the machines, the heart of their city. Zion is the heart of humanity that's left, and they're actually going to go to the heart of the machine city, which nobody thinks that they're even going to get remotely close to. Yeah. And so it's kind of a miracle that they do. And even, because... and a lot of people aren't even that excited about Neo anymore either. Like he asked for a ship and nobody even offers a ship. And then one female does. And she's like, you can take my ship, which I believe is called the Logos. And so just this interesting aspect. We have that whole situation with Bane, who is the representation of Agent Smith in the real world. Right. So we see this virus is actually moved outside of the Matrix.
It's in the consciousness of the individual who once was sort of like Neo, who understood,
right,
the parameters that were set up, but now is taken over by this darkness that has his heart in the real world now.
Right. Right. And so, and then again, we get another rebirth with Neo with the eyes, and Neo gets his eyes burnt out in the final battle with Bane. And he's actually, he's blinded by this. And it shows really the creation of spiritual sight, because now he's just starting to see energy even in the real world. And it's actually how he defeats Bane, because he actually sees this kind of like demon kind of fireball that he's able to destroy. And then we make our way back into the approach of the machine consciousness.
Right.
And this is actually a really kind of an intense emotional period, because they're traveling to and they actually go to try to rise above the crowds. Neo says, actually go up high, which is that higher perspective, higher altitude. But they're going to end up kind of actually crashing down. And this is actually where we're going to lose the scene of Trinity. And Trinity is sacrificed in this moment. And we'll kind of come back together of how everything kind of gets pulled back. And this is where Neo comes face to face with the machines. And we kind of have a discussion. And it's just so interesting because there's actually going to be this peace treaty made because of the disease that the machines got started, which was Agent Smith, that got out of control. And so now these two warring camps are actually having to come together to re-instill care. Right? We need to take away this disease of the lack of care. That we need to take away the disease of the skull and bones, the thought and the action. And we need to make sure that we add that mother emotional aspect there. Because again, the world has gotten so hard, it's no longer recognizes its mother, which is creation.
Right.
And we've gotten so hard and isolated and pulled away from that, we forget the hands that actually hold us. And so that's kind of this. That's where we kind of see this in this peace tale that's brokered, and this kind of this resetting of the matrix, and kind of this resetting of some of these programs, is going to be how this kind of system falls out. But the fascinating thing is about this, and we obviously learn that Neo and Trinity, they actually like get their bodies back, and we kind of have this reset. But the most interesting part I would say about that trilogy is probably the last scene. Right, of the whole film. So we have this peace in Zion. We have peace between the machines. But I think one of the most interesting aspects is the last scene between the architect and the oracle. Mm-hmm. In that conversation. And the oracle brings up the aspect of so we have peace now, right? There's peace between the machines and the humans. And the architect, who again is that left side dominant,
the ego, right?
It's like kind of that ego, almost that demiurge, which we'll talk about with Gnosticism, like almost like that fake God's confidence. She asks him, what happens to others that want to get out? And the architect, who's been very cold this whole time, has let to know the distrust and the dislike he has for the human race as a species, says if they want to get out, they can get out. And I think that's the biggest message, as complicated, as heavy, and as, big that this matrix has gotten, there's still this opportunity for self-reliance, self-individuality, breaking away from those kind of systems, in any which way possible. But really just, again, kind of gaining own of our own energy and aligning those aspects of the thought, the emotion, and the action. So it's no different than any other stories that we broke down. This one was just in a little bit more parts and kind of was presented in a little bit different of an environment and a setting, but still it's the completion of the consciousness. It's the coming home of the thoughts and the emotions and the action. And really the prophet is this unity consciousness. The prophet of this era, the prophet of this age, is the coming together of that left and that right hemisphere. And that's our only savior. It's not going to be an external savior. We learned that with Morpheus. You can't put your eggs in that basket. You are the savior. It's you coming together and actually going through this alchemical process and really, pushing energy behind the left and the right side of the brain and making them come together. That's the key way to the next, and that's the gateway to the above. And it's the only way out of the matrix.
It's the only way out. Well said, man. This was great.
This was a marathon, my guy. This was our longest episode, right?
What I like about this long episode is it doesn't feel long to me, just because, again, it's all put together in a trilogy, and 3 is a very important number as well. But as you go back and watch these movies, if you do, try to see all the correlations that we've talked about even before doing this episode.
Right.
A lot of it's all there with the laws that we've talked about from the from hermetic laws to or philosophies and understandings to the principles that we brought up from just the readings that we talk about within those principles. They can be found everywhere, and in this movie it's just laid on pretty thick, but also with a coating of that science fictional approach, much like Dune, much like Star Wars, much like many of the movies that present these allegories. So anything else you want to add into there?
No, I love it, man. I love it.
Cool, man. Well, until next time then.
Until next time.
All right.